Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 1 of Consumer Behavior. Chapter 1 looks at everything we're going to talk about in this class. Just gives you a really nice overview. So we're going to spend just a few minutes in Chapter 1 and orient ourselves and kind of briefly talk about the topics that we're going to spend more chapters on throughout the rest of the class. I encourage you to read your textbook and look at some of the examples in the textbook. There are some really interesting ones. And first, I really want you to consider your phone. You probably have your phone within 10 feet of you right now. And I just want you to think about when you decided on your phone, did you decide on an Apple? Do you have an iPhone? Are you an iPhone person? Or did you decide on an Android? Are you an Android person? And think back to that very first time you bought a smartphone. Did you choose the iPhone? Did you choose the Android? Can you remember what it was about the one that you chose that was the deciding factor for you? Was it that it was cooler, one of them had a better camera, or maybe it just happened to be what your parents had, or your parents were upgrading and you got the one that they weren't going to be using anymore? Was it what your friends had? Was it what you saw on an advertisement? Was it that you really were a big fan of Apple or Google as a company? Or maybe you liked that there were a lot more Android options and you could get a Motorola Android, or you could get an LG Android, or you could get a Samsung Android. But think about that initial decision to buy that smartphone, right? That's what consumer behavior is all about, right? Why do people buy the things they do? Why do people make the decisions they do? If you ever thought about majoring in psychology in college, this is the marketing class for you. This class is all about the why of why people do the things they do in terms of consumption, in terms of the services they buy, in terms of the products they buy, in terms of how they use products, in terms of how they even dispose of products as part of consumer behavior. All kinds of really interesting things from infancy all the way through old age and even death go into consumer behavior. Think about how quickly it is that kids even learn to use a smartphone, right? My 2-year-olds can talk to Alexa and ask her to turn on Baby Shark, right? That is the beginning of consumer behavior, and then them starting to learn about brands and consumption and products and technology and all of those things. So I love this class. I love looking at consumer behavior. This is why I went into marketing. Why do people do the things they do? Okay, so think about your phone as we sort of walk through this, and we'll probably come back to this example a lot of times because we pretty much all have phones, right? And so and many people are very loyal to either Apple or Google in terms of the Android or iPhone operating system. So let's look at chapter 1. Again, this just orients us in terms of what we're going to talk about throughout the whole semester, okay? So if we look at this consumer behavior framework here, you can see that we have both external influences and internal influences. If you're thinking about your phone, maybe an external influence was that all your friends had iPhones, right? I remember when my niece lived with us when she was in middle school, right? I don't actually think that everyone had an iPhone, but that was her perception, was everyone had an iPhone, and that's what she wanted. She wanted an iPhone because that was her part of her reference groups of her peers, right? And even kind of the subculture of middle school, if you will, right? Then of course there are internal influences, right? Your own perception and learning and memory and your own experiences that you've had. We'll talk your personality, attitudes towards different things. And so we'll dig into each of these sub-influences. We'll dig into culture, we'll dig into demographics. We'll talk more about perception and learning and emotions And we'll talk about how do we apply what we know as marketers, right? How is it that we can appeal to people who are really rational, or people who are more emotional? What are their gender differences? What are their age differences in terms of how people make decisions in terms of consumption? And there are in both of those cases. Of course, self-concept and lifestyle kind of is influenced by the external and the internal getting mixed together. Do you identify yourself as an iPhone person or an Apple person or a Google person? Many people do, right? Think about your phone being taken away from you for a week, right? Or think about someone, you wake up tomorrow morning and all of a sudden all the iPhone people have Androids and all of the Android people have iPhones. I imagine that most of us would feel rather disoriented and sort of like a piece of ourselves are missing, right? And that's how some products and some brands are, and that they worked very hard to create those emotional attachments with consumers, right? That people identify their self-concept, right? Those products and brands are part of their lifestyle, are part of their self-concept. I had a student a couple years ago who was really into CrossFit, and I didn't know at the time, but apparently Reebok has really made a comeback as the CrossFit brand. So as a CrossFit person, Reebok became part of her lifestyle because it is associated with that activity. Okay, and so then of course we get into the decision processes. This is the same consumer decision making process that you would have seen in your 350 Principles of Marketing class, right? Starting with problem recognition all the way through purchasing the product and your post-purchase processes, satisfaction or dissatisfaction. All right, so we'll dig into that a little bit more in detail than we did in Principles of Marketing, and we'll spend like a chapter on each of these pieces or elements of the decision-making process, instead of just throwing it all in one chapter like in the Principles class. So if you want to think about this in terms of units, the first unit we're going to talk about, the first section, is the external influences. We'll go through unit 1, we'll have an exam. We'll go through unit 2, internal influences, have an exam. And then our last unit is unit 3, the decision process. We'll have an exam there. Okay, so units 1, 2, and 3, kind of pretty clearly distinct between each other. Right? But they also build on each other. And then just to, again, continue to orient ourselves to the beginning of the class, and what we're going to be doing, let's define consumer behavior, and your textbook defines it this way. It's the study of individuals, groups, or organizations, and the processes they use to select, secure, use, and dispose of products, services, experiences, or ideas to satisfy needs, and the impacts that these processes have on the consumer and society. So that's a mouthful, it's a lot. The bulk of the class really focuses on individuals and then the selection of the actual products. That's what the bulk of the class is focused on. Okay, but it also includes these other pieces, how they actually use them. Think about growing up in your family. Lots of families have like family game night, or think about your 4th of July traditions or your Thanksgiving traditions. Okay, that's all sort of in that use section. Family rituals, that's another area in consumer behavior. Okay, and then disposal. We don't talk about disposal a lot in this class, or really generally when we talk about consumer behavior, but it is a part of it. And there is, growing evidence that we need to consider this more when you think about all the trash in the Pacific Ocean and how big that sort of trash island is becoming. And we'll touch on that a few times. And then we also want to think about, we talk a lot about the marketing of products or how consumers choose products, but this is also how consumers choose services. How do you go, you'll get a full-time job after this, you'll move to a new town, and you have to go find a new hair salon, right? It's the hardest thing. How do you pick that new hair salon? Okay, how do you pick experiences? Is that festivals that you go to, or concerts, or Walt Disney World, which sort of wraps up a whole bunch of these things, right? Or even ideas, or nonprofits, right? What types of causes do you donate to, right? What types of charities and their causes do people donate to, and why? And even what political candidates do people support, right? And why? That all fits into this idea of consumer behavior. So it's a really big, broad idea that encompasses a lot of things, and we're going to try to break it up using that framework of internal and external influences and how they influence the decision-making process, okay? And so all of those things have impacts on the process. All of those internal and all of those external influences, right, are impacting that consumer decision-making process in terms of products and services and experiences and ideas and all of these different things and places, right? Places we might go. Okay. And then there's also an impact on the consumer, right? That they're actually going to get the product, and are they satisfied or not satisfied, and how do we loop back around then to a repeat purchase and the next time they need to purchase something in that category, as well as society. So we'll look at what we call social marketing, okay, which is not social media marketing. Social marketing is marketing with the goal of having some sort of social benefit for society, like anti-smoking ads, or PSAs about getting out in outdoors. A lot of PSAs for kids, a lot of things that have to do with children, but also adults. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then of course, there's also outcomes for the firm in terms of market share and product positioning and perceptions that the consumers have. Okay, so that sort of gets into those pieces here, the social marketing. We also look at regulatory policy. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. One of the most famous ones that people talk about in this category are food labels. When you go to the grocery store and you can look at the food label and see how much protein is in a serving and how much sugar and how much sodium. That was a big push based on some data that they had collected on consumers and what they were consuming and why. Okay. Marketing strategy really gets into predominantly the 4 Ps, the marketing mix that we've learned about: product, place, promotion, and price. Okay. And then finally, informed individuals. Right? We don't live in a vacuum. It's not just that marketers say a lot of things and consumers just hear those and go buy things, right? Individuals over time become informed and actually informed about marketing practices and understand, that marketers are trying to sell them something. And in fact, we know that it's definitely by age 8 that children start learning that concept, that an advertisement is a company trying to sell them something. And by like 6th grade-ish, children start to exhibit like skepticism towards advertising. Okay, so that actually develops relatively early on. So that's informed individuals. So just one quick example. If you ever go to the grocery store and you see this label, USDA organic, on something, this fits into the idea of regulatory policy and consumer behavior. And so the USDA said, hey, if something's going to be labeled organic, we think that consumers should have a definition for what organic means, so that all things that are labeled organic are created with the same processes and regulations. And so in order for like a crop, wheat or something, to be organic, there are very, very specific regulations. Things like you can't have used inorganic fertilizer for the past 3 years, right? You have to have 3 years worth of growth without those chemicals before that 4th year can be labeled organic, and there's a whole certification process. So if something is labeled USDA organic, it has a seal, especially, but if it's labeled organic, Typically that should mean that it has followed these very specific processes laid out by the USDA. Interestingly, if you label something natural or healthy, there are not the same regulations there, not the same guidelines. In those cases, typically there's really no actual requirements or guidelines. So anybody can label something natural, and it doesn't necessarily, there's no consistent definition across products or brands as to what that means. So that's sort of where that regulatory piece comes in, and governmental agencies saying, hey, we think that all food products need to list their ingredients, for example, so that consumers can have that information. So we will dig more into that in one of the chapters, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of what that might look like. Okay, so I touched on this a little bit. All of this really starts at the company level, where they're looking at the market and doing a market analysis and saying, what are our strengths, right? A SWOT analysis, like you guys have already learned about. Who are our competitors? What are they already doing? If we create this product and go into this segment, what do we think our competitors will do? What do we foresee? What are the market conditions? How's the economy doing? What are our trade agreements like with our trading partners around the world? And they're really looking at the consumers and what are the trends in terms of consumer behavior. Then we look at market segmentation. Again, this is another concept you have heard about before. Okay, so we are looking for groups of consumers that have similar needs. Okay, typically we think of this in terms of demographics, but it does not have to be, right? It could be psychographics, geography, lifestyle, a wide variety of things can help us describe each group and each segment. Okay, and once we know which group of people we want to target, then we move into marketing strategy, our 4 Ps, right? And make sure that all of those work together for that overarching P of people, that market segment that we have determined. And then finally, we want to look at the consumer decision-making process and consider, how does an average person in our market segment, how would they recognize that they have this problem that our product solves? And is it a naturally occurring problem recognition, or is it something we need to sort of help them along with? The same thing for each of those stages, okay? And then we're going to look at outcomes. I kind of mentioned those before. There are individual outcomes of them actually purchasing the product, the firm itself, and then overarching societal outcomes, okay? So really, if we're going to sum it all up, the consumer decision-making process is sort of this intervening factor between our marketing mix and then the outcomes in those 3 areas, the firm, the consumer, and society. Okay. The more a firm understands its customer, the more effective it can be in helping the consumer select that brand during the decision-making process, okay? And just to sum everything up, this just, again, looks at what we're going to talk about. We'll come back to this little framework with every chapter, just so we can continue to sort of see where everything fits in together, right? We like to categorize things into boxes, but more often than not, all of these things are sort of blurry and they work together. And this just gives us a good framework to understand how they work together. Okay. All right, so I want to take us back to your phone again. Think about, again, are there external influences, internal influences that impacted your choice of brand of phone? And then how does that impact your self-concept, your lifestyle? How does your phone fit into that? And as you think about the decision-making process, if you're going to upgrade your phone and get a new phone, all right, let's think about, we'll talk about this as we get into those chapters, right? But what is it that makes you think, hey, I really need a new phone? Are you the type of person that just uses your phone until it really just breaks down and dies? Or are you the type of person that says, okay, the next iPhone is coming out, I'm going to pre-order it as soon as it comes out, as soon as I can? And how does that work for you, right? Do you ever consider getting a different phone? the next Galaxy is coming out, are you just going to get the new one? Or do you consider other phones and do you search for information about those? Do you read reviews? Do you talk to your friends? Right? And then what criteria actually help you make that final decision? And then where do you purchase it? Do you go to Verizon and just get whatever deal, right, they have going? I come from the era of where we actually, every time you re-upped your contract, they gave you a free phone. Right. So for me, price is a big issue when I go to get a new phone. And so I'm like, why am I having to pay for a phone? I'm so used to still, I know it's been a while, kidding, with that free phone. It was very, you know, you just became accustomed to that strategy that the company had. And then that change was a big shift for consumers, right? Or do you buy it on eBay, right? Are you looking for a deal and you're willing to buy something that's maybe used or a little bit older, or maybe it was a return to the store? And then what impacts your satisfaction, right? Are you simply maybe if your phone broke down, you're really satisfied because you have a new phone and it works really well compared to your old phone. Or maybe you get the upgrade and there are some features that you really miss, or you switched from an Android to an iPhone, or vice versa. You know, and there are some key aspects of one of those that you kind of miss. So we're going to get back to this as we move into the next chapters, and we're going to try to reorient ourselves with this phone example as we kind of move through. Okay. All right, everyone, have a great day.